Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a deep, dark well. People are shouting from behind you, "Jump in!" That's how you'll grow. That's how you'll learn. And you're thinking, wait a second, why would I throw myself into a pit? Just to prove I can climb back out? Sounds ridiculous, right? But that's exactly what so much of today's self-help culture tells us. Fail big, fail often, because failure is the best teacher. Really? Do you really need to set yourself on fire just to learn that fire burns? Hi, my friend. Today, we're going to have a deep, honest conversation about one of the biggest myths floating around in personal development today, the glorification of failure. And by the end of this conversation, you might see success, failure, and growth in a completely different light. Now, before we dive in, let me tell you this. You didn't land here by accident. If you've been searching for clarity, for a new way to look at your life, you're exactly where you need to be. So stay with me until the end, because I promise you, what we're about to uncover might just change the way you move through the world. And while you're here, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Not because of algorithms or numbers, but because it's a way to stay connected to conversations like this, the kind that spark real transformation. All right, now let's get started. Have you noticed how failure has become a kind of trend? Everywhere you look, books, social media, seminars, there's this constant message: embrace failure, seek failure, fail forward, as if failing is a badge of honor you need to wear to be worthy of success. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to say failure has no value. If something goes wrong, of course there are lessons to be learned. But somewhere along the way, we've started to romanticize failure, to treat it like it's the ultimate path to growth. And that, my friend, is where we've lost our way. Here's the thing. There are two kinds of learning. One comes from clarity, the other from pain. Pain will teach you, yes. But clarity can teach you without the bruises, without the scars, without the years wasted, climbing out of a hole you didn't need to fall into in the first place. Think about it. Would you take flying lessons by crashing a plane first? Would you sign up for a skydiving class and say, you know what? I'll just learn from hitting the ground? No, that's absurd. So why do we treat our lives, our careers, our relationships, like they're experiments where destruction is required before wisdom? I think part of the problem is that we live in a culture obsessed with stories of struggle and redemption. We love to hear about the billionaire who was once broke, the artist who was once homeless, the entrepreneur who was once in debt. It inspires us, sure, but inspiration is tricky because it can make us believe that suffering is a prerequisite for greatness, and it's not. You don't need to be broken to be whole. You don't need to lose everything to appreciate what you have. You don't need to fail spectacularly to succeed deeply. Here's what I want you to know. It's not about avoiding challenge or discomfort. Those are natural parts of life. It's about cultivating clarity so you don't create unnecessary chaos in the first place. When you have clarity, you see the potholes before you step in them. You make decisions that align with your values instead of blindly following trends. You grow because you're aware, not because you're constantly crashing and burning. And here's where things get really interesting. Clarity doesn't come from collecting more success hacks or memorizing rules from gurus. It comes from something far more powerful and much simpler: fascination. When you approach life with fascination, you naturally start to observe instead of judge. You become curious instead of reactive. And in that space of curiosity, your mind opens up. You start to see patterns you couldn't see before. You start to realize that so much of what you thought you knew was just conditioning, programming, noise. This is where we come back to sincerity. The ability to look at your own mind and say, I don't know. 3 little words that most people are terrified to admit. But those 3 words are the gateway to clarity. When you say, I don't know, you're not declaring defeat. You're opening a door. You're stepping into the infinite space of possibility. A space where true learning happens without the need for catastrophe. See, most people get stuck because they identify with their knowledge. They cling to what they've learned like it's their identity. But here's the truth. What we know is tiny. What we don't know is infinite. And when you confuse the two, you end up living in a very small box, repeating the same patterns, thinking you're growing. But really, you're just decorating the walls of your cage. So let's flip the script. Instead of asking, how can I fail more so I can learn more? Ask, how can I become so fascinated, so present that I learn before I fail? In the next part, we'll go deeper into how you can cultivate this fascination and sincerity in your daily life, and how this shift can completely transform the way you move through challenges and opportunities. Let me tell you a story. A close friend of mine once decided to start a business. He was excited, passionate, and ready to change the world. But instead of preparing, learning and building slowly. He jumped headfirst, because everywhere he turned, the advice was the same. Fail fast, fail often, fail forward. And fail he did, spectacularly. He lost his savings, his confidence, and almost his marriage. Later, when we sat down to talk, he said something that stuck with me. I didn't fail because the idea was bad. I failed because I believed failing was the goal. This is what happens when failure becomes glorified. It becomes an identity. People wear it like a badge of honor, but secretly, they're hurting, stuck in a loop of chaos they didn't need to create in the first place. Here's the thing. Life will bring you plenty of natural challenges on its own. You don't need to manufacture extra pain just to feel like you're growing. Growth comes naturally when you live with awareness, when you pay attention to the patterns unfolding inside you and around you. Think of it like driving. Would you purposely swerve into a ditch just so you could learn how to call a tow truck? No. You learn to drive well by staying focused, by noticing the road, by learning from the near misses and the moments of grace. You don't need the full-on crash to become a skilled driver. But here's why people get trapped. Drama feels exciting. We're addicted to dramatic stories. The bigger the fall, the more glorious the comeback seems. That's why so many self-help books and viral videos focus on extremes. Because extremes get attention. But attention isn't the same as wisdom. And excitement isn't the same as fulfillment. I'll give you another example. There was a woman I worked with once. Let's call her Emma. Emma was brilliant, talented, and deeply spiritual. But she had this belief that in order to truly awaken, she needed to go through some massive breakdown. She would literally create drama in her life. Toxic relationships, financial chaos, spiritual crises, just so she could have something to overcome. And every time she came out the other side, she'd post about her rebirth like it was a badge of enlightenment. But the truth? Emma wasn't evolving. She was just spinning in circles, mistaking motion for progress. And I see this everywhere. People are terrified of living quiet, steady lives filled with clarity and joy, because they think it's boring. But here's a little secret. Real growth often looks calm on the outside and revolutionary on the inside. It doesn't need fireworks to be profound. Now let's get practical. How do we actually live this way? How do we learn without falling into the trap of glorified failure? The first step is observation without judgment. Most of us go through life half asleep, reacting instead of responding. We don't really see what's happening because we're too busy labeling everything: good, bad, success, failure. But when you practice simple observation, when you become fascinated by your own mind, your own reactions, something magical happens. Clarity begins to emerge. It's like cleaning a foggy window. At first, everything looks blurry, and you stumble around making guesses. But as you wipe away the fog, the view becomes clear, and suddenly you don't need to trip over the same furniture again and again. You can move gracefully through your life because you can actually see where you're going. Here's where the irony comes in. The more fascinated you are, the less dramatic your life becomes, and people might even mistake that for playing it safe. But in reality, it's the opposite. You're taking the most courageous path of all, the path of consciousness. Let's pause here and reflect. Right now, think of one area in your life where you've been waiting for a big failure to teach you something. Maybe it's a relationship, a career move, a personal dream. Ask yourself, what if you didn't need the crash to learn? What if you could cultivate enough clarity to see the lesson before the fall? This isn't about perfection, it's about presence. When you're fully present, you don't need to chase failure for wisdom. Wisdom naturally arises from the way you live each moment. And let's be honest, saying I don't know is terrifying at first. We're conditioned to always have answers, to appear certain. But when you admit sincerely, I don't know, you open yourself to reality as it truly is. You become a student of life, and life itself becomes your teacher. This is why the greatest masters throughout history, from spiritual leaders to scientists, have all shared one thing in common: humility. They understood that what they didn't know was far greater than what they did know. And from that humility came breakthroughs, not just in knowledge, but in wisdom. Humor can help here too. I often laugh at how seriously we take our own opinions. We cling to them like life rafts, as if being right will save us. But in reality, most of our opinions are just temporary data, shaped by experiences we barely remember. Isn't it funny how passionately we defend something so fragile? So, instead of building a fortress around what you think you know, try this. Become endlessly curious. Curiosity dissolves fear. Curiosity dissolves ego. And curiosity opens the door to a kind of intelligence that doesn't need failure as a teacher. Remember Emma, the woman who kept creating drama. When she finally shifted into true curiosity, her life transformed. she stopped chasing breakdowns and started noticing the subtle lessons in everyday moments, a conversation with a stranger, the way her body felt when she made a decision, the small synchronicities that pointed her toward growth. And guess what? Her life became both quieter and infinitely richer. That's the paradox most people miss. The quieter your outer life becomes, the louder your inner evolution can grow. In the final part of our conversation, we're going to explore how to bring this awareness into action, how to navigate challenges and opportunities with grace, and how to live in a way that feels deeply aligned, even when the world around you is noisy and chaotic. So how do we live this out? How do we stop glorifying failure while still embracing the inevitable lessons life brings our way? It starts with a simple shift. Respond, don't react. Most people react like reflexes, automatic, unconscious, conditioned. They live like machines running old programs, unaware that they even have a choice. But when you begin to respond consciously, you create space between stimulus and action. In that space, you gain freedom. And freedom is where true growth lives. Imagine someone insults you. The reactive mind lashes back instantly, hurt, defensive, angry. The conscious mind notices the sting, breathes and asks, "What's really happening here?" That pause alone can save you from 1,000 unnecessary battles. It can prevent a chain reaction of pain that might take years to untangle. This is how we learn without falling apart, by paying attention to the small moments before they grow into big problems. Think of it like tending a garden. A single weed is easy to pull out, but if you ignore it, it spreads, wrapping around everything you've planted until your whole garden is choked. Your awareness as the gardener, the more attentively you tend to your inner and outer life, the fewer weeds of chaos you'll need to rip out later. Here's something I've learned, and it might sound strange. Peace doesn't come from fixing everything. It comes from seeing clearly, because when you see clearly, you don't create unnecessary messes in the first place. This is why fascination is so powerful. When you're fascinated, you become like a child again, wide-eyed, curious, alive. You stop assuming you already know how things work. You stop labeling every experience as good or bad. Instead, you simply explore. And exploration, not judgment, is what keeps you learning. I once met a man who lived this way, completely open to life. He had faced unimaginable challenges, poverty, illness, heartbreak, but he never identified with his suffering. He treated every experience like a teacher, not by seeking failure, but by welcoming the lessons hidden in ordinary moments. He told me, "The most profound awakenings happen while you're washing dishes or walking in silence, not while you're dramatically falling apart." That stuck with me, because isn't it true? We keep waiting for the big moment, the dramatic breakdown, the movie-worthy climax where our lives will finally make sense. But life isn't a movie. It's a series of quiet, sacred moments, each one offering us a choice, to react or to respond, to stumble blindly or to walk with clarity. This is where humility comes in again. When you admit, "I don't know," you become open to guidance, whether that guidance comes from your intuition, from a teacher, or from life itself. But when you cling to certainty, you close yourself off to growth. You become like a cup so full of water that nothing new can be poured in. The universe is always whispering to us, but if our minds are noisy with assumptions and fears, we can't hear it. Fascination quiets the noise. It makes us available to insight. And when insight comes, we no longer need to crash and burn to understand ourselves. Let's circle back to the metaphor we started with, the dark well. Remember how absurd it seemed when people were shouting, "Jump in, that's how you'll grow." The truth is, you don't need to leap into the darkness to prove your courage. Real courage is walking toward the unknown with your eyes wide open, your heart humble, and your spirit curious. Now let's address the question people often ask me. But what if I've already fallen into the well? What if I've already failed? Here's what I tell them. If you've fallen, you will learn something climbing back out. Pain has its teachings, no doubt about it. But don't confuse survival with wisdom. The lesson isn't that you need to keep falling. It's that you're capable of rising. Once you're back on solid ground, let that be the moment you choose clarity over chaos. Because when you live this way, your life stops being a cycle of breakdowns and comebacks. It becomes a steady, graceful unfolding, like a river flowing to the ocean, not a storm tearing through the land. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. Okay, this sounds nice, but what do I do tomorrow when I wake up? Here's a practice you can start right now. Every morning, before you touch your phone or rush into the day, sit for 1 minute, just one. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and silently ask yourself, what don't I know about this day yet? What am I open to learning? That simple question shifts you into a state of fascination and humility. It sets the tone for everything that follows. And if you practice it daily, you'll find yourself making choices with more clarity, more grace, and less unnecessary suffering. Now here's where you come in. If this conversation has sparked something in you, if you felt even a flicker of clarity or curiosity, I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe, not for me, but for you. Because when we walk this path together, it's easier to stay awake, to stay fascinated, to stay free, and share this video with someone you love. Not as advice, but as an invitation. Hey, let's explore this together. Because ultimately, this isn't just about you or me. It's about all of us, learning to live in a way that honors the gift of being alive. So my friend, remember this as you move through your life. You don't have to jump into the well to prove your strength. You don't have to glorify failure to become wise. You can choose clarity, fascination, and conscious action. And in doing so, you create a life that's not just successful, but deeply meaningful. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real revolution. Not falling and rising, but walking with open eyes, open heart, and open mind. Live awake. Learn without falling. Walk with clarity.